Hello, everybody, and welcome to the European VC podcast. I am David, also known as the LP Syndicate Lead, and today I'm joined, as usual, by my dear co-founder, Andreas, the LP Hype. Today, we are welcoming Emma Steele from Ascension VC. Emma is a partner at Ascension's Impact Fund, a seed-stage venture fund focused on creating resilient societies by backing impact-driven founders that are driving commercial value and hopefully on their way to become the next impact dragons. Ascension has an established portfolio of more than 180 companies and notable investments led by Emma, including Wagestream, Kudos and Tembo.
And remember, everyone, if you're listening in and love our show, drop us a review, follow the pod, and subscribe at EU.VC.
And now, some words from our beloved sponsor. How are you currently reporting to your LPs? Is fund administration taking hours? Are you getting lost in spreadsheet version control? Well, Flow solves all of these issues and more, allowing you to unlock the power of your fund's data by consolidating your work streams onto Flow. Book a demo to learn about Flow's portfolio and fund management features and transaction infrastructure at flow.io/VC. flow.io/VC.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
United and determined, we can serve as a model for other regions of the world.
The nature of a problem requires a European response.
Europe is a story of new beginnings, new beginnings.
Let's start acting. This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Emma, let's start this thing off with your journey into venture. Would you share that story with us?
Absolutely. Well, my journey into venture was very much led by my desire for impact. I wanted to be UN General Secretary aged 12, probably 12 to 15.
It's a very ambitious goal, by the way.
Yeah. But, it kind of, it led me to doing philosophy, politics, economics at Warwick. When I left France to try and know a little bit more about my second culture. I'm kind of half French, half English. And then did development economics and needed to try and find a career. And to be honest, I fell into banking accidentally. I needed to repay a master's loan pretty quickly, so took up a graduate scheme at Santander. But I never really forgot the kind of desire to advance social change. And I quit in 2016 to start to think about that. Did a little bit of time doing consulting for charities to try and make them more financially sustainable. And that's how I started to think about impact venture, so for-profit, for-purpose venture models, as I was led to conclude that actually it was a more effective way of scaling impact models.
I find like super interesting that you have that experience, helping charities, as you said, become more financially sustainable, and how that led you into venture, right? It's a funny because, and I commented with Andreas prior to this recording. It's funny because many of the GPs that we met, we've had conversations about who's your ideal LP, right? And charities, foundations is actually the ideal LP profile that many of us would love to be working with on the long term. So I'm just curious to know, could you share a bit more light on how working with charities then ends up taking you to venture? For me, it's a bit unexpected. And I think for most people in that space, it's not the typical route they take.
No. Well, incidentally, actually, a few of our LPs are foundations themselves. And we have this debate all the time because they straddle both worlds. But I started that job because I think at the time, Big Society Capital, who's, again, one of our main LPs, was invested in quite a few what you call social investment funds that only invested debt or debt instruments into asset locked entities. And what I found working directly with those charities is that often, I'm not saying all the time, but often the idea or the need to get debt was actually driven by the existing business model of the charity being completely unsustainable or highly dependent on local authority funding, for example, and they needed to do something completely new and completely different, open up a new trading avenue, and then get investment to leverage it. So effectively, a lot of the stuff we were doing was putting debt into equity-like business plans, and with charities and founders of those charities that were very unaware of what it took to use and plan for free cash flows to repay said debt, and kind of a lot of risk attached to that. Plus, there's in the charity world, there's a little bit of a bad rep for the concept of profit. And I didn't like that. It doesn't sit well with me and my philosophy of the world. So I started to look into who was doing tech for good investing at the very early stages in the UK at the time. And there was not that very many players. There was Mustard Seed, Bethnal Green Ventures, and Ascension wasn't necessarily defined as an impact investor at the time, but they had an amazing portfolio. So I started stalking them. And I think I cold outreach to Kieran, who was Ascension at the time, Kieran Hill, and that was it.
I think that's a pretty interesting story and something that we don't hear too often. And I'd love to ask you just, to dive a bit more into that pivotal moment in your life and describe to us how it really shaped you as an investor.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably two pivotal moments in my life today. One was when I chose to leave France, with not much. I mean, I was okay with my vocabulary, but my English wasn't that great, and little support system to kind of go to uni and explore new areas, new adventures. That sort of shaped me probably as an individual, taught me resilience. But I guess the professional pivotal moment is when I decided to live my personal values in my professional life, and I decided to take a huge risk in order to be able to do that, which is, one day I woke up literally it was from black to white. I woke up in front of my computer at Santander and decided to leave with no plan B. And often now that I know a lot of founders and other investors and even friends who are in their mid-30s, we've on average all had that kind of moment, I think, in our mid-20s. But I was feeling very rebellious at the time when I did that. And, I'm not saying I didn't learn anything at Santander. I think it really, the time at Santander shaped how I approach things as an investor. I think I use a lot of the sort of breaking down things to first principles, and kind of asking the stupid questions on business plans, having the confidence to kind of question very basic bones of a problem and business model. I think was down to my experience in credit, and really using a founder's financial model as a way to kind of understand how their brain works when it comes to thinking about their growth drivers. I love doing that, and I love using that as a kind of base to understand how they see their own path to growth. But I think understanding that you need to juggle the unknown and take calculated risk when the upside is worth it. It's something I've done, and something I really I lead with empathy now that I go on that journey with founders and I get to know them. And I think it's important to really get the underlying personal drivers of why someone does something in the startup space in order to even begin gaining conviction on it. So that's how I start with a founder, probably because of that experience.
I love that story. It really made me reminisce on like the kind of similar story, but for myself, like the day that I decided, no, I'm gonna have my own thing. I'm gonna be my own boss. I'm gonna have my own business. I'm gonna truly be an entrepreneur rather than be working with or for someone else, right? And that feeling of full unknown, like it's kind of scary, but it's also
Yeah.
kind of freeing, right? And it also made me think of the day that Andreas and I decided to start building EUVC. It was like it's such a cool thing, and I can definitely see why you say that you lead with empathy when you've gone through that, right? And you're working with founders. I think that's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that, Emma. Really made me smile.
Could I ask you a question, Emma? Because leading with empathy when we're talking about working with founders and then being empathetic because you have that experience yourself, of choosing to go that route of leaving the known and secure, makes it much easier to deal with founders, right?
Yeah.
I can't help sometimes, and I know we have our producer listening in on this call, and she's an employee of ours, right? But I can't help but think that sometimes when we're leading a company and in every VC all day long, we're working with our GPs, our partners, and then we're working with our founders who have also all taken that step. But then at the same time, we're managing an organization with people that are, by definition, not yet at a stage where they've chosen to leave their jobs because they're with us, right? How do you?
Yeah.
I always find it difficult to think about how do I put myself in the shoes of an employee, because part of me wants to take up our employees and say, leave us, goddammit, go and build your own thing. And another part of me wants to say, well, I want to motivate you inside this world of EUVC. But I also want you to, of course, stay with us, right? So how do you think about that, Emma, in terms of your own management towards your own team?
I mean, you need to look at the individual personalities and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Like there's actually one of my very dear colleagues who I've been working with for over 5 years, Nico. I always knew he was a builder at heart, in the way he thought, in the way he approached things, in the way he built, some of our own tech stack at Ascension over the years. So I knew it needed to be the case that at some point he would kind of fly off and do his own thing, and that's what he's doing. It's actually his last day on Friday. But I am, I pushed him to do that a little bit. When he was kind of talking to me about, maybe thinking about doing that, and it's the best possible thing for him. But then there's, other personalities where you don't necessarily need to be that creator. I think I am creative in some ways, but I know in my heart that I'm more likely to remain an investor, an enabler of other people's passions and visions, rather than an operator myself. And I think that's okay. There's value in everything.
So Emma, I'm really looking forward to our chat today because, I'm very excited to hear your thoughts but more importantly, your experience here on talking to LPs about impact and returns. And the reason why I find it so interesting is we've done a lot of episodes here around this topic and similar topics. We have a partnership with Toplink from the World Economic Forum, which led us to talk with a lot of impact-focused VCs. But you have something of a unique experience here, which is, you did a little test yourself at a major VC conference earlier this year to effectively test out like different approaches to pitching to LPs about yourself. And I'd love to hear that experience and that story. And more importantly, what are your learnings and how are they relevant for other GPs out there?
Yeah. So, we've been fundraising towards several different types of LP stakeholders for over 12 months now. We've been talking to foundations, family offices, high net worths, corporates, fund of funds. And the statement I'm about to make is probably less true towards some types of LPs, more true towards others. But we started with actually being quite factual about what the fund was doing, which is the entire theory of change of the fund is to invest in tech-enabled solutions that tackle social inequality. However, although some LPs resonate with that, foundations will tend to resonate with that mission. It is more difficult to convey the excitement and the sort of emotional empathy that some LPs need in order to go on a journey with you. And family offices actually or more often tend to be that type of stakeholder. But to be honest, fund of funds as well, even more formal financial institutions. And I've pivoted a little bit to being more positive in the way I pitch the fund, which is actually the fund. What the fund is doing is creating more resilient societies. And not only will LPs resonate more with this, but they actually stop questioning as much whether there is a trade-off between financial returns and impact when I talk about it that way, rather than talking about it in terms of social inequalities. And potentially it's less politically charged. There's less, fewer issues attached to it, or maybe they can think, their imagination can think about the kind of the solutions out there with the second part.
You said that it's probably a bit different profiles that resonate, and then you ended up also saying, well, actually, the more professional investors, the fund of funds, do actually also resonate more with this kind of messaging. But I'd be curious both to hear. Let's start with the messaging part and ask you the question: where do you see the lines really differ, or the reactions differ? Are there profiles that are clearly more in the give me the numbers, then let's talk story afterwards, and those that are completely in the other, or is it more context wise? Because I think there's also a bit of a difference between, are you sending over a deck and a blurb, or are you actually at a dinner party trying to give someone the rundown of your fund? It's probably better to tell the story.
Yeah. I mean, look, it always starts, whether it's a formal process with a fund of fund, a foundation, it always starts with an individual being the champion. Especially if it's an individual in a wider organization, they need to be enabled to be the champion for your fund internally. So there's actually a lot more conviction building needed even at the fund of fund level, I think, because there's a lot more kind of defense and internal committees to go through. So that's one thing to think about. But I think the differences depend on what buckets the investment is made of. Even for foundations, the foundations that have backed us, there have been several buckets. Some have been actually converting some of their grant programs to impact investing, in which case we barely talked about returns. The others were actually allocating a part of their main endowment to impact, in which case actually they're extremely risk averse. So return was the first conversation, and it's very similar to for fund of fund and probably more institutionalized family offices. They either have an impact allocation, which has a specific return target for them, or they're experimenting. So in general, we're although we are targeting venture returns, the way people see us is in a bucket, and we have to be able to fit that bucket. So the story needs to go with our bucket and create that imagination for people.
It's funny that you bring that up, and also the beginning of the story that you started sharing. Like, it's this thinking about buckets and kind of the biases and whatnot that we have, and I always find it funny that impact is oftentimes like people's minds goes to there's kind of an assumption around returns when you hear the word impact, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts or reflections on why that's the case. Is it because we're doing something wrong as an industry? Is it because, historically XYZ? I don't know. Super curious to hear that. And then after, I want to deep dive into a completely side topic about impact and whatnot. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this first.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of impact is very closely linked to philanthropy in people's mind, and philanthropy is giving money away. How can you even fathom returns? But part of the issue is that you don't question, or you don't try to understand, or one doesn't try to understand the underlying thesis or theory of change, or what you're trying to actually do within the impact space. Impact is just a lens; it's an intent. It's doing investing with a specific intent or a specific lens. And the journey I take people on is actually through this intent, through this lens, you can actually be driving more commercial value down the line. Some people are easy to convince on that, and others, it's just not their philosophy. But I'm a big believer in inclusive capitalism, and that's what, that's why I think you can affect change.
I'm very curious about a thing, because the only firms we ever hear talking about theory of change are impact firms. And it's a bit interesting, because I can't help but think that all the other firms also have, if not a theory of change, then at least a theory and how you then fit into that change. But you have a thesis around what's the future going to look like, and for that reason, okay, I have a theory. We had Facebook. I think that we're going to need one that's focused on images. For that reason, I'm going to invest in things like Pinterest and Instagram and whatnot, to put it very easily, right? But I actually think that that's very much a theory of change, and I think it's a very powerful mindset to be using towards LPs. I'm curious to hear your mindset around this.
Yeah, I mean, what I've done since starting our first impact fund is always try and align any impact related framework we had going on with our investment strategy, align it completely with our commercial, with our kind of commercial investment strategy. I.e., the theory of change is as much of a view of the world and what we want to achieve from a kind of social impact perspective, but actually what kind of value we can create for our investors down the line, and how. And I think it's that alignment that isn't necessarily always possible, but is where I think we impact investors demonstrate their value, rather than backing more generic thematic funds that happen to have invested in impact driven companies. I think the value comes from, again, that intent around what you're trying to achieve from a commercial and impact perspective, hand in hand.
So I have we're talking about a bit LP and GP-LP relations, obviously the topic we love the most at EUVC, and I'm hoping to get you in a tiny bit of trouble, Emma, by asking this question, just because I find it a somewhat interesting topic as well, which is, there's a lot of capital geared more towards impact, climate, sustainability these days than there was like 5 years ago or whatever. But a lot of that money, mostly institutional money, also comes with a lot of, I'm not going to call it red tape, because it's not red tape, but like reporting requirements and like views of how you measure impact and et cetera, et cetera. And I've always thought, like, in early stage investing, so pre-seed and seed, obviously, like the model, and we know it because that's the parallel. The model is that most of these companies will fail. Most of these companies will die. So why the hell do you want to measure impact knowingly that 60% of this is going to die? And so isn't there a better model? I don't want to get you into trouble, but I kind of want to get you into trouble, because I'd love to hear your experience of, have you seen LP expectations into how you report on your impact or how you disclose impact just completely misaligned with the venture model and what you guys are trying to build? And what do you think is the way forward?
Interesting. I don't think it's misaligned at all. But basically, what's most valuable to LPs, even just commercial LPs, is to understand at a portfolio level what's the deal. What's my current TVPI, what's my current cash, and if you're an impact LP, what we provide to you, and what's most difficult to achieve actually for generic impact funds, is a monetary value of what social impact you've managed to create out of the portfolio level. So the KPIs that we require our companies to report on help us create a sort of quantitative measure of how much we've moved the dial, whether it's wages enabled, cost decreased, or health outcomes that have been interpreted into an economic outcome. And it's that overall portfolio level view that I think is super interesting for LPs, and it's dinner party conversations, for family offices, not notably. But I think from my perspective as well, in venture, I find it super interesting to even start to talk about the concept of KPI reporting, impact KPI reporting at the early stages when we talk to founders, even say third conversation, what would a typical relationship look like working with us as an investor, working with you as a founder? I will mention the potential impact KPIs that we might expect them to report on, and I test how much value and how much engagement the founders have with that. And if they tend to be like, oh, that's great, I can integrate that in my sales sheet, or I already report on that because it's super valuable, then that's a proof to me. It's a signal that the scale of the impact is in lockstep with the returns of the company, and is very valued by the founder. And I think on the failure point, it's interesting because a failure financially isn't necessarily a failure from an impact perspective. And we've had one example recently in our existing fund, where the business just ran out of cash, wasn't able to find product market fit quick enough before they ran out of cash. But the existing platform was amazing, and the engagement was great. It got acquired by a company that was more focused on other audiences. So it was a kind of social inclusion platform that sold into more of a kind of recruitment business for older age. And from a financial perspective, it was nada. But actually, the employees of the platform were retained, and it still exists and is still scaling within that bigger business.
VC would probably be one of the businesses where you would say it is in a way a pump and dump scheme, in the sense that if a portfolio does take off, then we're very quick to move on to the next thing. And some would say that we then leave some zombies behind us. This, of course, for an impact fund is probably taken a bit worse by the LPs than in a normal financially purely focused fund. How do you think about that? Have you seen, reflections on the LP side around that? And how do you think about it as a fund yourselves? Because it is one of the downsides of VC, right?
Yeah, but this is potentially a controversial statement, but I think one may be able to actually limit failure with the right relationship management on portfolio companies. The way we set up ourselves as a fund is that I always think about fund outcome, how to allocate our time in the best way possible. And I will tend to think about our investment into founders. I sort of emotionally give them kind of 2 years, 18 to 24 months to sort of demonstrate product market fit, jump the hoops, and by that time they should have then received Series A money, in which case our formal role, our formal kind of support can scale back. And for those that are taking more time or potentially needing to go through pivot or experiencing other problems, I think there's a lot of value in that. I work very closely with our portfolio director, Julia, and she's kind of an extension of me, but she, in her way, is an emotional defender. She stands for the portfolio, and we have this kind of healthy tension where she's like, we need to allocate time and resources to this company and this company and this company, and then we kind of figure out through push and pull how to allocate most of our attention. But in comparison with other funds, I agree. Overall, we are just more hands-on across the portfolio.
Interesting. I could imagine that it's also something you would expect as an LP in an impact-focused fund.
Love is in the air, everywhere I look around.
Now, Emma, I'd like to give you a shout out to co-investor, an angel or an LP for just being plain out awesome. And of course, also share with us the story behind that awesomeness.
Yeah, I'd like to shout out to Big Society Capital, who is our anchor LP in our next fund and has been backing us in our existing fund as well from the very beginning. They have been comfortable with allowing us to test and shift a lot of the investment strategy and really go on a journey with us into the unknown and to really discover what the potential of our impact fund had. And they've been an unwavering champion of Ascension from the beginning. I think they also really believe in impact as a driver of value, and for that, I think they're an exceptional LP to have for any impact fund out there.
I want to take us into the 3 biggest learnings from your last 10 years of your life. And I want to ask you to first just list the 3 for us, because I love having that. And then we can dive deeper afterwards.
Okay, cool. So number 1 is really don't ignore your gut feeling, but rather unpick it, understand it, and embrace it. Number 2 is you really don't have to like sales, but you just have to keep going and learn to be good at it. And number 3 is, on average, I really believe that it's better to interrupt too much rather than not interrupt enough.
When I saw these, I thought, okay, I'm going to want to talk about how you unpack your gut feeling, because I think this is a topic that, given that VC is all about decision-making in the end, it's so important, I think, to be able to make gut decisions, but at the same time, also not just be the guy who walks around and, doesn't really have anything to pin down your actual decision on in the end. So would you tell us a bit of your method for unpacking your gut feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think about decision making as a kind of separate list of things, of reasons which make up the gut feeling. I think when you build conviction on a founder, market, business model, you do it as a compounding effect through the different interactions that you've had in the process of getting to know the founder of the business. And I think each interaction reinforces each other. And when you do get a gut feeling, the way what is probably driving that, you have to kind of sit and think is in the past you may have come across say a slowness in response, a slight defensiveness in a certain stance, or a lack of excitement at a certain at a certain statement, and it may have resulted in kind of a certain path to decision making. And these kind of compounding thoughts and processes are registered in you, and it then helps you to build your own intuitive framework as to how to gain conviction. And I'm talking here as an early stage investor where there's zero quantitative, very few quantitative metrics to play with. So the entire point is to believe in the upside story of a problem, of the depth of a problem, of the size of the market, and to understand and see enough signals around that to de-risk that story. And if those signals through those compounding interactions are more green than orange and red, then I think that results in conviction.
So where I think that the magic, and so I'm very much a gut feeling kind of guy, right? And I think that if there's anything that I would have to, because it would be very easy for me to default to making gut decisions, right? And I can make a lot of arguments for gut decisions to making a lot of sense. Many of them centered around exactly what you also say. Your gut decision or gut feeling in the end is the summary of all your interactions, and it probably supersedes my ability to think consciously and objectively and put together a sequence of learnings, compared to, it's just a very good summary, right? But in the end, that is where I am today. What happens when, with that decision made now and then in a year, if I don't make sure that I formalize that, I'm going to have a very difficult time becoming a better investor in something that has so long lead times as venture. How are you thinking about that? How are you documenting to make sure that you get smarter year on year on year?
Yeah, and I actually think that's that unconscious bias is a product of not doing enough of that. For instance, not doing enough of that unpacking of the gut feeling. I think we absolutely have a duty to understand and formulate. I'd say put a framework around understanding that gut feeling, and we formally list all of the ones we've taken to IC. And we decided not to invest. So that's one we're formally keeping a record of and tracking. I've got kind of Google alerts on them and everything just to see what's going on with that. And then for our next fund with Jean, who's my partner, we've decided to also build up a shadow portfolio for the ones where we have a strong sponsorship for. There will be always one of us that will be the sponsor for the deal. We will need to have accountability, i.e., if within 1 year a set of decisions has led to X negative outcomes in the next year, we need to rethink how those investment decisions have made. So it's keeping each other accountable. But during the investment calls, we use a scoring framework, which has become a bit clunky. So we need to kind of make it more effective. But we put a score on market, product, team, and within the team, there's a lot of subsections on that, and that allows to kind of keep a little bit of a memory of what our initial thought was, alongside notes, on our CRM. But there's always a case for being more automated and more effective on that. At the moment, it's a bit clunky.
And now, the quick fire.
And now, Emma, it's time for the quickfire round, where we ask you 3 quick answer questions.
Okay.
What advice would you give your 10-year younger self?
So, I would say, don't be scared of taking a wrong turn. There is no wrong decisions when you don't know where you're going. I would say your sensitivity is your superpower, and don't take your humility as a weakness. It's part of your style and your identity.
What are your top tips for emerging VCs across Europe who are fundraising?
You won't be surprised by that one, but very regularly rework your vision and your narrative, because you rarely get it right first time and you have to test it often with multiple stakeholders. I would say warm introductions, sadly, probably our biggest source of conversion. So always try and seek a kind of first or second degree connection to a target. Even LPs who end up rejecting you, who say not now, can end up being champions for you. So do keep them very close and find people in the space, other GPs that are in that fundraising journey with you that you trust.
What's the most counterintuitive thing you've learned since you've been in venture, Emma?
When I started venture, it was profits are overrated. The second thing is failure and knowing how to fail and when to fail is good. The third thing is a decision made fast with, say, 60% knowledge is better in outcome than a decision made very slow with 90% knowledge. And final thing, your inbox is your biggest enemy.
And now let's cue the commercial for Superhuman, which Andreas Yours truly, Hype Man, is a very avid user of. If anyone wants a free month, contact me. I'll give it to you. Then I'll get it as well. So that is our impromptu promo spot here for software we love. Everyone, thanks a million for joining us for this episode of the European VC. If you enjoyed it, drop us a review, follow the pod, and subscribe at EUVC. As you know, I'm Andreas, the LP Hype Man, joined by my very own bestie and co-host David, the LP Syndicate Lead.
And we thank you so much for tuning in today and can't wait to see you all out there.
How are you currently reporting to your LPs? Is fund administration taking hours? Are you getting lost in spreadsheet version control? Well, Flow solves all of these issues and more, allowing you to unlock the power of your fund's data by consolidating your work streams onto Flow. Book a demo to learn about Flow's portfolio and fund management features and transaction infrastructure at flow.io/VC. flow.io/VC.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
United and determined, we can serve as a model for other regions of the world.
The nature of a problem requires a European response.
Europe is a story of new beginnings, new beginnings.
Let's start acting.